Welcome to the Femsplainers, and welcome to the second part of a two-part series that we began last episode called When Sons Become Daughters, concerning the sudden spike in the number of teenage boys deciding that they are trans. In part one, we spoke with journalist and academic Angus Fox, who wrote an important series of articles on this topic in the online journal Quillette. And we also heard from trans woman Karina Cohn, who underwent full-sex reassignment surgery when she was an adolescent boy at 19, and now she's in her 40s. Karina shared her remarkable and at times heart-wrenching story of what her body and her personal life have suffered over the years since. And if you haven't listened to that episode yet, I urge you to do so before listening to this one. So in part two, I speak to two mothers whose teenage sons have come out as trans, and how they've been dealing with that as parents. They belong to a group run through the website parentsofrogdkids.com. ROGD refers to rapid onset gender dysphoria, or the phenomenon of children who, with no previous history of showing signs of gender confusion, suddenly self-identify themselves as transgender, often simultaneously with others in their peer group. This organization offers more than 50 support groups for parents across the U.S., as well as support groups internationally. In 2020, we covered this phenomenon happening among teenage girls when we invited journalist Abigail Schreier on the podcast. She had just published a book called Irreversible Damage: The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. As I already mentioned, part one of this series laid out how the same trend is also occurring among teenage boys. But it's very rare to be able to speak to the parents of these children. For obvious reasons, they want to remain anonymous. Aside from protecting the privacy of their children, these parents fear backlash from their communities, their friends, even other family members for expressing their concerns. On this episode, you'll hear from two mothers whom we're calling Anita and Claire. As they will tell you, they each had sons who were struggling with other mental health issues and or personal problems, and both suddenly decided the solution for these problems was to become trans, even while neither had exhibited previous signs of gender confusion, as those who are truly dysmorphic do, and usually at a much younger age. The issue for these mothers, as with other parents in this group, was that when they went to seek help from doctors, therapists, schools, teachers, really everywhere they turned, they were told to accept this change of identity right away, and even to start the medical transition of their sons to daughters through the use of puberty blockers, hormones, and of course, eventually surgery, all of which can have irreversible lifetime medical consequences. No extensive diagnosis was ever made or offered to their sons. These professionals simply took these boys at their word, sometimes after only a half hour or so of conversation. And if the parents questioned this quick diagnosis, they were told their son could be at risk of committing suicide, or that the parents' refusal to accept this sudden new identity was a product of their own prejudices and bigotry. As Angus Fox pointed out, most of these parents are nothing of the kind. They're educated, often politically liberal, and they just want to support their children in whatever way they can. They just don't want their sons or daughters to make such life-changing decisions at an awkward and early stage of their development before their bodies or even their brains have matured. It's a wrenching situation to be in as a parent. The slightest wrong word can have the effect of a nuclear missile on the relationship, and they're terrified of becoming estranged from their children. So I'm really grateful to Anita and Claire for coming on the podcast, for speaking out about this, and for trusting me to protect their identities so others might hear and understand their perspectives. But before we start, I just want to repeat something I said at the beginning of part one. We need to be clear about what we are not talking about. That is, adults who make the decision to change their sex, be it to male or female. That's their right, that's their own business, and like any other minority group, they should not face discrimination or bigotry based on this decision. This is not about being anti-trans or even pro-trans. It's about a completely separate phenomenon manifesting itself in trans identities. And before we go to the interview, I just wanted to remind listeners that we can only have these kinds of conversations because of our supporters at Patreon. Without them, we simply could not exist. So if you want to keep these conversations going, if you enjoy the podcast, please consider becoming a member at patreon.com/femsplainers. That's patreon.com/femsplainers with whatever you can afford a month. You'll get a bonus episode in which you get to ask our guests questions. You'll get our monthly newsletter. We have a little virtual cocktail party. And at certain tiers, you'll get the regular podcast early and ad-free. So please consider supporting us. Let's keep these great conversations going. Patreon.com/femsplainers. Now let's go to Anita and Claire. Anita, Claire, welcome to the Femsplainers.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for having us, Danielle.
Well, I just thank you for sharing and being willing to share your stories. It's so important. And I know how difficult it is, not just because it can be painful for you, but of course, we're in a climate where it's very hard to discuss these issues in a honest way. So thank you again. And I'll remind our listeners that both of you are coming on semi-anonymously. Why don't we talk a little bit about that and get some background on both of your stories? So Claire, why don't you start? Tell me about your son and what happened. How did you get here?
Well, my son is 17, and about a year and a half ago, he had been kind of difficult and sort of going through what we thought was just teenage rebellion. And he was sort of disrespectful, and he just was in his room all the time. And then he was sitting downstairs on the couch, and I thought, oh, he's decided to join us. Oh, this is a good sign. And then he said, I have something to tell you. And I'm like, okay. And he just said, I'm trans. And I'm like, what? You know, and it was sort of, I didn't really believe him, or I shouldn't say believe him. I just was like, you know, thinking, no, you're not. And, but I didn't say that out loud to him. I just said, okay, why do you think that? And I thought, oh, well, he'll outgrow this, or we need to figure out why he thinks this, and maybe the doctor will help. So I had called his pediatrician the next day, and the pediatrician said, oh, I want to see him. So we went to the pediatrician, and I thought that the pediatrician would sort it out for us. And I had also been thinking that maybe my son was ADHD, and I had never gotten him assessed for that. And I thought, oh, maybe I need to get him assessed, and he'll figure out, oh, I have ADHD, I'm not trans. So the doctor sent us to an ADHD specialist, and she decided that he did have ADHD, and she said, but there's a doctor here who's an ADHD specialist and a gender specialist, and he has an opening tomorrow. Would you like for us to see him? And so we said yes, and we thought, oh, we'll go in and he'll sort it out. And that's not what happened. What happened was the guy affirmed him without any information, and he said, if you don't support him, there's a 44% chance that he'll kill himself right in front of my son. And he also said, maybe you should start by using she, her pronouns. And like, we were like in shock, because we're like, what? Because we were so blindsided by this doctor right in front of my son, you know, just completely affirming it without doing any assessment.
You mean the doctor didn't ask anything about the background? How long have you been struggling with this? Has you ever shown any signs previously? Nothing like that.
No, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Not to us. He saw my son for like 30 minutes without us in there, which I didn't know at the time that that was what was going to come out of it. So I would never have let him see him alone. So, but I didn't know. And I sort of pushed back on this doctor and I said, my son's throwing a tantrum, and parenting 101 is you just don't give them everything they want, because my son was demanding hormones and puberty blockers and everything else. And I'm like, but how do you know that he's not going to outgrow this? Or, like none of those questions were answered.
So your son went into it, I mean, these hormones, aside from just sort of having to accept or work through the fact that he/she may have some gender issues, drugs were already on the table within the first, basically what you're saying, 30 minutes, hour of meeting with this gender specialist.
He did not, the gender specialist did not discuss that with us, but my son was saying, that's what I want.
Okay. So your son had researched this, obviously, and all right, I'll come back to you, because I also think it's interesting that when your son tells you he may be trans, and then you think, well, he might have ADHD. Those are quite separate issues. But so I'm sort of curious as how you came to that idea. But let's go to you, Anita. So tell me about your child. How old and when did he come out to you, as it were?
Sure. So in the fall, so about 10 months ago, progressively noticing that our child, who is typically very loving, compliant, happy, he's just a happy kid.
He's 14, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
started behaving quite differently, started sleeping a lot. We chalked it up to puberty changes, things like that. What really got us concerned is we noticed that he started pushing his food around the plate and really not eating. And he started to lose weight. And this is a child who has always been a great eater, who has never had issues with anything that we were aware of. So it was a very atypical behavior. And he was becoming more just despondent. Everything is stupid, people, just a negative attitude that we had never seen before. And he and I are very, very close. And it got to the point that I had been asking him, is there something going on? I know COVID's been hard. I know there's a lot of change. Are you okay? Mom, I'm just going through some stuff, working through it. Okay. I revisited it and revisited it. And finally, I was like, there is something going on with you. And I really need you to talk to us. And I pretty much threw out the whole, are you on drugs? Is somebody pregnant? Are you gay? Like I threw out every kind of parent thing because I knew, and he goes, kind of to all of it. And I was, okay. Well, let's talk. And so handed me um, a phone that had a Google Doc on it, which was basically a letter saying, Mom, I bet you think I'm going to tell you I'm gay, kind of, but not quite. I'm actually transgender, and I am really a girl, and I'm lesbian. And then I proceeded to read a letter that basically read what I know now, I didn't know then, is basically the description of being trans or experiencing gender dysphoria, like the DSM. And so basically it was, I have gender dysphoria, I have this dysphoria, and this is how I present. It was like, I know now it was like he took the definitions and inserted how he fit.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you'd like more information, click on this link. And if you want to know the next steps, here's what's next. Almost like an act. I gave him a hug. I said, I love you, and started crying. Then asked not for me to tell his father, which that's not going to happen in this house. And so I said, you need to discuss with your father. Be there. You can give him the letter, but you will do it. And so proceeded to give my husband the letter. My husband said, I love you, gave him a hug. We both said, we don't know anything about this, but we love you and we will figure things out. In his letter, he did describe, being worried that he might hurt himself, wanting to speak to somebody. And so we were really concerned from that front because we noticed such a big change. We did not see this coming. Our child, he has never fit in. He's always been super quirky, socially very, very bright from a book sense, and can tell you every Greek god and all the stars and mathematical and dark matter and water, but forgets to close cabinets, kind of that
Mhm.
everyday kind of thing. But nothing that was gender norming. Honestly, we were maybe prepared for our child to tell us that he might be gay.
Right.
Um, and so it was about a month to 6 weeks that I grabbed his school laptop to make sure it was charged because we had a day of virtual learning, and I saw a different name on it. And at that point in time, we asked him to unlock it, and I proceeded to find. So there are no social media is not allowed. Cell phones are only used for travel. No computers in the room. I'm very strict about gaming. I feel like technology has a significant negative impact on children in general, and it's taking over their lives. And so we're very strict about these things. What I did not think about is the school laptop that was put in the backpack just in case we were going to get like all of a sudden put into virtual learning. I didn't think about that computer. And so I found that on there, gone on Reddit and posted simple questions such as, why am I different from other boys? Could I be gay? And people responded with, you could be trans. Do you know what trans is? You're a girl. You're totally a girl. Um, and also information as to how to limit his diet, how to be thinner. And then I that there was some when I went through the history, there was a person or a user that was commenting more and more, invited to trans sub. This is all stuff I'd never even knew existed. Then invited to private chat rooms, and we uncovered private Google live chats where video was involved. And so this person we learned was an adult self-identified trans woman. We don't know, in fact, who or how we don't know if it was like a sex trafficker. We don't know if it was really somebody who's trans trying
How
to be.
old did
So what
person
what
seem?
we learned from our child said that the person told them what we saw. They said they were 22 and that they were a trans woman. So we just know that. And I proceeded to find hypnotic material that was affirming his gender dysphoria and very explicit that had been sent to him. Um, Other people telling him cutting yourself might make you feel better. We did uncover that he had been cutting and ultimately had a self strangulation event.
Oh my
Um,
God.
so we have a lot of what I would call external coach. The person we found out was telling him how to be trans, saying that if we did not not affirm, they didn't. We were toxic and bigoted if we didn't accept, come and get him and help him if they needed. So, yeah.
Wow. Claire, to go back to you for a minute, when I raised the ADHD, one of the things we learned in part one of this podcast was, just as Anita has described, that these boys often exhibit other traits very much in line with what Anita, how you described your son. Is that, Claire, why you sort of thought that this was it? Had he exhibited any of these other personality traits, or how would you describe him?
Well, I would say that he was a very active boy growing up, like the most active. He was the kid pulled out of class because he was disruptive. So I always knew there was something going on with him. And we did do an assessment, and they said that he was just gifted.
Yeah.
And so we tried to work with him because he was really struggling. And we did social skills classes and lots of things to try and help him. And he got better, so fourth grade was he turned the corner and he was able to kind of do better in school. And fifth grade, he was fantastic. And then sixth grade, things got difficult for him again because he went to a big middle school with none of his friends from elementary. And I think he was bullied a little bit.
Mhm.
And then he eventually made friends. And then in high school, all he ever wanted was to play a certain sport. And he made the team. And so it seemed like he was just on the right path. And he was, because he's a really good athlete and really smart. And, you know, he just, I thought that everything was going to be fine. And then he got cut from the team. And then after getting cut from the team, I found out that I found out that he had stopped hanging out with his friends from middle school and was all alone. So he started texting his friends from Boy Scouts. And there was one friend from Boy Scouts that also decided he was trans. So together, the two boys decided this together, that they were trans. And that explained why they were different, because ADHD, the kids think there's something wrong with them. And so this was like, oh, this is the explanation. So my reasoning for wanting him to get tested was, I thought, well, maybe he'll realize that's really what's going on with me and I'm not trans.
Mhm.
But it didn't work.
Well, how did your son react? Because obviously you were it's taken by total surprise, and I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, your son had never exhibited any gender dysphoria of any kind, even as a small child.
Never. He was all boy.
Right.
Like, and he loved being a boy. He loved his name. He loved everything about being a boy. He has all male cousins. So he fit in. He only had male friends. He never hung out with girls. He couldn't even name the girls in his class because he just had no interest.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden he says he's a girl, which didn't make any sense to us, because he doesn't really, we didn't think he knew anything about girls, because he really didn't have any friends. There was one girl in middle school that he became friends with, and who he is now dating. And that's the only girl who's ever been in
So
his
he's
life.
now dating a girl, and he's
Mhm.
obviously sexually attracted to girls.
Yeah, he says he's a lesbian.
But so his way is a lesbian. And how did he react when you reacted the way you did, especially with the doctor saying, I don't accept this. This is a tantrum. You're demanding things, that you maybe should not be doing at this age. How did he react to that?
Well, it was interesting that, because he hadn't shown any signs of depression, but then all of a sudden we realized that he had lost 20 pounds.
Mhm.
Like, he had been hiding it because he always wore like a hoodie, and he had intentionally tried to lose the weight, and we didn't notice it. He just said he was eating less meat and he wasn't snacking, and he lost this weight, and he had looked up how to do it. Like, he had never shown us depression, and all of a sudden he's saying, I'm gender dysphoria, but he hadn't done that until after he told us. And after this doctor, all of a sudden he was extremely depressed. And so I wasn't going to go back to this doctor. I found another psychiatrist to go back on, and he suggested antidepressants. And so he went on antidepressants, which actually really helped. And he is no longer depressed, and he no longer has gender dysphoria, and he has gone off the antidepressants and is completely himself, except he still holds this
Idea.
philosophy. Yeah.
And when he was on the antidepressants, did he still maintain that he was a girl?
Yeah.
Anita, how did your son react to your reaction?
Well, like I said, we didn't do much at first. We just said we love you and gave him hugs. Much to react to. There was a lot more, what I would say, outward, external. Suddenly there were nails painted, there were shaved legs, clothing that showed up and I didn't know where it came from, because it wasn't mine. So
Mhm.
somebody at school must have given it to him, or he got it from somewhere. My child presents very differently from hers. Mine always associated with girls. We felt he fit in better, or he felt he fit in better with girls. He has said to us that if he was a girl, his life would be easier because no one would care if he wasn't athletic. No one would care if he was with girls. More of that, which you would, I guess I've learned now, term pre-gay kind of behavior, where he gravitates towards women in general, and his name with the boys, and has always been made fun of and bullied and called faggot and gay and teased relentlessly and told he was a girl. So our presentation is differently different. We, because we found the parents group quite early, and I had done all the things like made the appointment for the clinic, made the appointment with the doctor, was going to the school, joined the local PFLAG group. We had all those things in the works, and so we told him, please have patience. Please just pause for a minute. Your father and I get more information. We find people to talk to, and our child, interesting, he's not that pushy. He's pretty compliant. He actually did what we said. Now, during this time, we saw his mental health spiral down. We noticed he started cutting, self-strangulation event, that really pushed us where we didn't know if he'd need an inpatient psych admit. But what happened, found some other resources that combat the 44% suicide rate that we're quoted all the time. Some other kind of ideas and thoughts of how to address it. And after he was okay with us saying, just pause for a second. Things were in the works. We were finding a therapist. We were finding the things for him, and he was okay with that. After his big self-harm event, he scared himself and said that he thought this stupid gender stuff was coming from the bullying. So he had a massive event at school that basically he came home and strangled himself and passed out. And he begged not to return to school. And so we pulled him and circled the wagons and stayed home and got him a different location for schooling and got a counselor who would work through what he was dealing with and not gender affirming, which was very hard to find. And actually, each week after that, once we made the change about 4 months after his declaration, we started to see slight changes. His appetite improved. He was sleeping better. He was no longer sleeping in our room, was smiling, happy. And each month he stopped, I would call the performing behaviors. Notice the nails weren't painted, the legs were not shaved. And so each month his mental health improved. And ultimately, a couple weeks ago, he said, I'm very thankful for you as parents. You could have rah-rah sis boom bawed me or kicked me out of the house, and you did neither. You chose to parent me. I was mad at you at the time when you told me to pause and have caution, because there are things that I was wanting to do that I could not undo, like tell everyone at school or discuss with all the family. Those were all things he wanted to do, and start dressing different socially. And he expressed that he was very angry with us then and thought we were hypocritical because we value honesty. And he said later that he recognized that we were just trying to have him pause and think about his actions.
Right. So was he pushing to have the puberty blockers and start that level of physical transformation?
So he never brought that up with us. The only things he brought up were the clothing changes and wanting to talk to a doctor, which we think was the launching point for that. But he never directly asked for that. He asked me directly for different name and pronouns. He has a younger sibling, and he recognized that to change a name and pronouns in front of his brother would be exceptionally confusing. So he still recognized that. And when we were asked that, I said, I need to think about this because it has multiple ramifications, not just to you, but to our entire family. We never made that switch. He never asked for it again. And later, when asked about it, and this was about a month ago, I said something about, you had asked for a new name and pronouns. Where are you with that now? And he said, I could care less about that. And I just said, okay.
Would you have been more accepting if he had said, I'm gay? Like you mentioned, you reached out to PFLAG and things like that.
So I don't know that it was that I was accepting. I honestly didn't know anything about kids being transgender. I have experience with people being gay. I have a gay brother. So in this house, if he had said he was gay, fine. What do you need to know? What do you need help? Do you need support? Or are you just letting us know? It wouldn't have now where we live, it would be a big deal because we are in the South. So there are some discussions we would need to have about safety, mindful of who you talk to and how, because that's a very real thing in the South. Um, but I honestly, when he first told us, I just needed to get information. I equated it.
So it was not so much that you felt that it wasn't necessarily gender dysmorphia. That the fact of him, I mean, let's say he really is one of the small percentages of people who do suffer from gender dysmorphia.
Mhm.
Would you accept that if it was demonstrated to you?
My personal view now, then I knew nothing about this subject. I'm going to be honest. I knew that there were people that said they were transgender, or I really knew transsexual more, and they chose to live a different way. And that's all I knew. And that's fine with me. I never had another thought about it. Now, what the way I view it now is I feel like trans is something you do, not something you are. And it's a coping mechanism for something. I don't know what that something is. Now, if an adult chooses this coping mechanism and these series of events and behaviors because that's what they find that they think is best for their long-term life, health, and well-being, then I think an adult who can weigh all of those things can do that. That's fine. My personal view, looking at the actual and now, I think the medicine is poor for adults and for children. So if he was my adult child who was telling me this, I would still have grave concerns. Long term outcomes, both mental health and physical well being, are not that good.
Mhm.
And so I would have concern, not from a ethical, political, religious perspective, from a health perspective. I know that my child has an underlying medical condition that complicates anything that he does. And so I would have grave concerns for his health and physical. So I know that's a large answer, but I think the transgender subject is so complicated. You don't have to think about it until you have to think about it.
Right.
It seems simple, but it's not.
Claire, a lot of people who are less not confronting this in their own lives, or like Anita, you haven't thought about it much, might say, well, why don't you just let it blow over? You know, if he wants to be called a she, indulge the name, you know, maybe it's a phase. Why not take that approach?
Well, the only reason not to take that approach is because at 18, which is in less than a year, he can walk into any Planned Parenthood or doctor's office and they will give him hormones, no questions asked. So there isn't any gatekeeping of making sure, you know, getting them assessed or checking psychological issues, or even if you give the doctor, which other parents have done, you know, show them the comorbidities that they do have, they still will give them hormones. So you can't prevent them from harming themselves. And so the more you think, I'll just let this ride out, I think you have to be active. You have to, you know, it's baby steps. And that's how I've been approaching this, is slowly showing the information of the harm that it can cause.
Right.
Well,
I
and
think that was, oh, sorry, Nina. I was just going to say one of the takeaways from part one, talking to Angus Fox, the journalist who was writing about this, was the idea that before, when they first started doing these surgeries, and this phenomenon was becoming more apparent in I guess, the late 80s, you would have to go through 2 years of counseling. You'd have to have real assessment for gender dysmorphia, and it seems to go against the code of doctors, the Hippocratic Oath, that you would prescribe things that can have these life-changing effects on you, with, it sounds like, virtually no consultation. Just you're taking the patient's word for it. It's one of these weird situations where the patient is diagnosing themselves and telling the doctor what it is, and the doctor's going, oh, okay, then I'll give you this.
Yeah, I was going to some argument too that social transition and change of name and pronouns is actually a treatment method in and of itself, because there's a positive reinforcement component that when you start to make those adjustments and make those changes, whether it's at home or at school, that's actually reframing the child's developing identity. So during these formative years, they are developing their identity. So if then we reinforce it, that is a treatment method in and of itself. So it's not nothing. It's not just being passive and letting it ride out. It's actually a treatment modality that then often leads to the others. And so there's more literature coming out that says if kids socially transition, and that includes the name and the pronouns and the dressing and all those things, that most of those kids go on medical treatment as well. So it's not giving them time. It's actually an intervention. So that's something to think about from a parent's perspective. And also, I think when you were alluding to what used to happen in the past, where they had to undergo this therapy, live for a year or so as the elected gender, during that time, they were also required to say, this is what my plan is, but at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
They were actually required to look at, if I do this, then what is going to happen, from what will I lose or what will be different, so that you can truly do a cost benefit. Is this outcome what I'm looking for? Is that really going to be the best benefit? And that's really going to require higher level cognitive thinking that all of our kids don't have right now, just because of their age. So to ask a parent to just passively sit by and say, oh, just go with it, that's like saying, oh, go ahead and try that heroin, it might be fine. It just doesn't work that way.
Well, and as Corinna Cohn pointed out, I just found it heartbreaking. I mean, she said, you become a lifelong medical patient because you have to take these hormones your whole life. You have to, and we know as biological women that even taking hormone replacement therapy has its dangers and costs. So to drastically go the other way, and at such a developmental stage of your life, I don't think we even really know, honestly, what these long-term effects are going to be. Well, Claire, how did your family, your son has other siblings, and your husband, how did they react to this?
Well, my son is an only child, and my husband and I have been on the same page with all of this. And my husband is sort of someone who doesn't get really emotional about stuff, and he was really good about just listening to my son go on and on about how he felt, where I couldn't listen to it because it just was so painful. But my husband was really great in being there for him at the beginning and really listening, because I was too emotional. And now it's sort of, after researching, I now know what's going on and the dangers. And so we have been really firm about electronics and name changes, and that we're not going to change his name, even though he did change his name. And we pushed back, and that has actually really been beneficial, because it was almost like he was crying for help, and with us pushing back, he got, with coming out as trans, you get a lot of attention from friends
And positive attention.
And we tried really hard to like give him positive attention, but without affirming that. And I feel like it's starting to pay off, because the lockdown actually helped us in a lot of ways, because the three of us were home 24/7, and we have this great relationship now. We watch movies together. We have great dinner conversation. We go on walks every night together. And he started coming around, I feel, but he asked me not to talk about it. But so we haven't for a few months. But I feel like we're making progress, because he did say he doesn't want to do anything to hurt his health.
Right. That's message is so important, I would imagine, to get through. So you both joined this organization, and what made you seek out this organization? And were the stories from other parents very similar to yours?
Yes. In fact, it was interesting. People would say things and you think you wrote that. Like, they're like, there's a message board and you would say, oh, my son, and you think, wait, did I write that? Because it was exactly your story. There were so many similar stories. And I sought it out because where I live, I'm unable to tell friends because they would think I was just vile and
that you're bigoted, or
that I'm not supporting my child. And I was afraid to tell my family for the same reason. So I felt alone. And my husband didn't want to talk about it because it was hard for him. So I had no one to talk to. So I sought out a group. And so I found the parents of ROGT kids. And I joined a group. And that has really helped. I joined a group in my local community, and I also one that's international.
And does your son know you're doing this?
No.
What would bother him if he found out?
Well, he just thinks I'm talking to TERFs, which
yes,
and I'm, transphobic, and I'm just on TERF. He thinks I'm on TERF Zoom calls all the time.
Yeah. So it's just more about your inability to handle it versus protecting him from making an irreversible, potentially medical life choice.
Right. We want the best for him. And, if he wants to dress however he wants, which he has never done, he doesn't own any girls' clothes. He's never painted his fingernails or done anything. He has shaved his legs, but he hasn't done that in months. So he's not presenting in any way, and no one would mistake him for a girl. Like, even though his hair is a little long, he still looks like he's very masculine. So,
and he has a girlfriend.
And he has a girlfriend.
And do we know how the girlfriend feels about any of this?
Oh, she's all for it.
Yeah.
It's like exciting, and she pushes.
Have you spoken
I think
to her
she's a
about it?
cheerleader. I have not spoken to her about that, but when she comes over, it was a little bothersome.
Yeah.
When she'd call him by the girl name and things like that, it hurt.
Yeah. What about you, Anita? At what stage did you find this organization, and how has it helped you?
So like I said, I had joined like PFLAG and tried to find transgender parent support groups, done all the things in the very beginning. Healthcare field, I look to the healthcare field for support. And most of the time, moms of kids that have seizures know what you do about seizures. So I was going to the moms, and in one of those groups, I had noticed that any time somebody said, could this be a phase? What about this? It was always said, you need to affirm or your child's going to kill themselves. Well, what happened is I made some kind of question about have an appointment with his general doctor, and they said, hurry up and get him on puberty blockers before he gets too tall. And I'm in the medical field. I'm like, what is happening? I didn't know about these medicines, anything affirmative. And I was just shocked. And during this time, I had also been looking for a counselor. And when I was making phone, within 5 minutes of the phone call saying what's going on, I was asked, well, are you using names and pronouns? You need to do that so you can prevent suicide. Within 5 minutes. Nobody got more information. And I was just like, this is just wrong about everything I know to do with child development, because as I said, I work with kids. Um, and everything I know about the medical field, this is not how things are supposed to work. It doesn't make sense to me. So I started researching like people that don't agree with this concept or what is like just trying to get to the actual research and literature. And I came across a podcast by Benjamin Boyce and something by Sasha Ayad. And then I found Transgender Trend, which is out of the UK. So basically, Google and internet searches. And then I found the Parents of Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria network. And honestly, when I joined it, I was begging for everybody for help. I actually didn't know who was contacting me back. I was like, they're like, you applied for this. We need to make sure you're really a person. And I'm like, I don't understand. Why would I not tell you who I am? I now know why you might do that, not do that, and be so upfront about it. But I was like, here's my name. Here's who I am. Please help me. I don't care. I just need somebody who somewhat makes sense to me. Um, and that's when I found them. And I was on that message board and joined a more specific group. And it, like she said, like Claire said, oh my gosh, so many, you have kids that present a little differently, but the series of events, after a while, you're like, oh, I know what's next.
Mhm.
You're going to say they were on DeviantArt, and then they were on Reddit, and they were on Tumblr and TikTok. Oh, and then watch out for those Discord servers. Oh, like the scenario. Oh, I got the letter. The letter is the thing. And the letter almost always says something similar, or the text. And you're like, yep, yep. It's almost like there's a script. And then there's the requests start coming, the pronouns, the name, like it's a pattern.
Where is this script? I mean, as you point out, you are a healthcare professional. What are where is this coming from within the doctors, and what is the pushback? Where's the pushback coming online? As you say, like if you dare to question it, you're immediately asked, why aren't you celebrating it? Where is that coming from, especially amongst doctors?
Well, I did find, so there's SEGM, which is the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. That's a group of international healthcare professionals that are saying that the evidence used to support these interventions, specifically in regards to developing children, the science is what they determine to be low quality and poor efficacy. And nearly all of this studies, they have like a 30% dropout rate, which traditionally you wouldn't even accept that study. So they're trying to look at the actual science. So the study that says the high suicide rate, if you actually read through the actual study, it shows that the suicide rates are actually the same pretty much for ones that do pursue intervention and ones that don't. So that's not a good reason to do the interventions. And they're trying to pull out like, well, that study was based, on a sample of people that were in their 30s, not developing adolescents. And then, so there are groups like that. There are parent groups. There are some more what they call gender critical people. But you have to find them. And if you make the wrong statement in the wrong location, you will get attacked, canceled. People will call your place of business. Um, it is. I had no idea what I didn't know, and I found out professionally speaking that I am mandated to use the names and pronouns and somewhat use an affirmative model. So I have to be very careful with what I do. I have a personal opinion about things, but in the professional realm, I have to behave in a specific way. So that's another dynamic that I'm encountering 2 weeks after my child came to me. So I have my personal views about its impact on the special needs population because I work with children and adolescents who have autism, Asperger's, high functioning, anxiety, and we are seeing it impact that group disproportionately. So
So
those
you
people are
so,
out there.
so you think it's as much the doctors are cowed by the activist groups?
I think that I don't know what the environment was 5, 10 years ago from a medical perspective. I didn't encounter this and I wasn't in this world. What I see now is that there are definitely people who do not agree with the current affirmative model, but to say something publicly equates to ostracization. Depending on where you are, you might lose your license, you might not have employment, you might be shunned, you might be kicked out of a university. It's dangerous. And even for us, we have found a counselor who's older who says, I'm too old, I don't care. He's like, I don't care. Somebody comes after me, fine, bring it on. The counselor basically said, I will affirm his feelings, but I'm going to try to figure out why he has these feelings. That's what's important right now. And if he feels the need to hurt himself because of these feelings, we need to get to the root of that. And he's like, I know adults who have transitioned. You think they can make adult choices, so be it. I don't care what adults do, but there's no place for this for children. This is irreversible things that are happening. So you have people that will say things privately. It's almost like an underground. And there are doctors who agree. And like, I'm a healthcare provider who has this opinion, but I wouldn't have had this opinion if I wasn't in this world. And now at my facility, people know what's going on, and they are appalled. They thought the affirmative model means be supportive. Like you would think if your child came to you and said they were gay. They had no idea that it includes medicines and removal of parental consent, kind of things that a kid can access things without my permission, and it can impact his long-term health. And I can say nothing or do nothing about it. And in some places you can get reported from a parental perspective. You can get reported to the authorities and your children might be removed. So it's a circle of fear.
And Claire, you felt that as well. Have you seen the sort of, or felt pushback? You mentioned that you don't feel like you can talk about it with some of your friends, obviously.
Yeah, I have. And also my son emailed his counselor and changed his name and pronouns at school. And they did it without consulting us. And I emailed the counselor. She won't respond to my emails. And then I was afraid to do more, thinking that they could call Child Protective Services.
So I've never even thought of that thread. I knew that, activists, obviously we see it online, bullying, and but I never thought that Child Protective Services could be called against you.
Yeah, they could, because my son's girlfriend also would push for him to call. But he actually is really happy. He loves us. He's happy in our house, and he wouldn't want to leave. So, but I also told my son that he needs to be careful what he says to this school, or they might call Child Protective Services. And he's like, oh, no, they would never do that. And I said, just be careful. And then I don't think he does it anymore.
So where does it stand for both of you now? So Claire, how are things sort of settling? You said you're in a better place right now. What do you see down the road? Do you think she is going to continue on this path?
I'm hoping not. I can't say for sure. I get little signs all the time that maybe he's changing his mind, but he does have the girlfriend that's affirming, and he has that friend who has been on hormones since September. So his friend is transitioning. So it's hard to get a word in when he has such support in a different direction.
Was there any what physical changes have you seen with the friend?
I haven't seen the friend.
Okay.
And I think they just talk on the phone.
Okay.
Because of COVID, we haven't seen him. My son said the other day, he said, oh, I'm just a dude. What can I say? Which I thought was a really good sign. And he hasn't been willing to go to the, get in a bathing suit since he talked about this. And he said, oh, I'd really love to go to the beach. And so I booked a beach vacation, and he's very excited about it. So I just trying to get him to do stuff where he's in his body and has to use his body. And he was an athlete, and I'm trying to find another sport for him to do. And I feel like anything where it involves his body, might help him figure out that his body's okay.
Oh, unless he wants to join a girls' league and clean up.
No, he actually told me he's against it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Anita, where do things stand with you and your son, do you think, at this point? What do you see down the road?
I don't know that he would say he's desisted, but we're seeing signs of that. Like I said, he had said he no longer cares about the names and pronouns, had mentioned that maybe that the transgender label was not a good fit, that in his quest to figure things out for himself, he might have shoved himself into a more conforming or confining box, and that he made an interesting analogy. I don't know if I can share it without it. Well, I'll just share it and then we can maybe take it out. That he said it's like being at the grocery store and seeing, I'll just change it, a pack of Twinkies, right? You say, oh, those Twinkies look good. Those Twinkies are great. They're perfect. And you think those Twinkies are wonderful. And then you pick up the Twinkies and you look at the ingredients and you go, wait a minute, I'm not Twinkies. And you put them slowly back on the shelf. They might be good. They might work out for a while, but it's not good for you. And that's what he's said to us. So he hasn't said, I'm not trans, but he stopped, like Claire mentioned, the performing. We just recently came back from a lake trip where there is now underarm hair, there's leg hair. He was in a bathing suit, referred to himself as a guy, is no longer speaking in a high voice. And every day he is happy to go to school, happy to come home, interacting well within the family unit. The counselor has said he was still sorting through the gender stuff, but that just might take him some time, and is actually mentally doing well. We are fortunate, or I don't know if it's fortunate, we were just able to do some things. He's had zero internet access, no cell phone. We've cut all contact to internet, social media. We switched schools. He has now disconnected on his own from people that were supporting him in the real world by giving him clothes and sending him TikToks and calling him the female name. He has disconnected on his own and stated they weren't really his friends. And said that without the influence of the internet, he's beginning to have his own thoughts about what's going on with him. So take that for what you will.
Right.
I feel to give him some space is what he needs. And hopefully we have, because of his age, more time. He knows I'm part of these groups. He knows that I do trainings when we have professionals come and talk to us. He knows that I'm very medically based, and I pulled the studies on the medicine and said, if you are ever going down that path, there's information that you need to have because of your medical history. He's mentioned that he knows that I have all that. So we're in a little different situation. We've been probably here for about 3 months.
Wow. Well, thank you both for sharing these perspectives. I know whenever your child goes through anything, no matter how minor, especially the mother, just you can't sleep at night, if you think that your child is suffering or struggling, and wanting to be there and help them through whatever it is. But I really appreciate your candor. And I know it's difficult to talk about for all the reasons you mentioned, but really, really grateful to you for coming on and sharing your stories.
And Danielle, can I say one more thing?
Of course, yes.
So my son, no longer has gender dysphoria, and he told me quite a while ago that he just wants to be a woman. And it's like these kids are just trying to escape pain and think, oh, if I take hormones, then I can start all over. And everyone's going along with it. And it's almost cruel to these kids to, it's like, like, oh, you can become a wizard, like a Harry Potter thing, and these kids are believing it, that like they can start all over and get rid of this body. And I think it's terrible to let these kids think this way.
False advertising.
Well, it's also weird that we are in a moment where there is amongst both young men and women, it seems, such self-loathing of their sex, and that they are seeking, as you say, that there may be other issues, including it could be homosexuality, or it could just be these other underlying comorbidities of just not fitting in, being awkward, being unique in some way, and trying to find a solution that is, in the end, if they pursue it or follow through with it, certainly medically, is going to have such long-term consequences. So I agree.
Well, and also I think that they don't want to be a man.
Right. Like what's the problem with that? Has either of your sons said why they, not that they don't think they're men, but is there a reason, have they said why they don't want to be men?
Well, my son has said, my son has said that he thinks men are toxic, and he doesn't want to be that. And I don't know if he got that from, porn, which we wonder, or just that white men aren't actually, there aren't good role models right now for that. Mm-hmm. And I think that has a lot to do with it. And, when I was growing up, I didn't want to be like my mom, and maybe my son doesn't want to be like his dad, but it doesn't mean you opt out of your sexuality.
Right. And it's not going to fix whatever it is. Like it's a hard thing to opt out of.
Yeah, it was really not presented as an option then, where now it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
For mine, remember I mentioned that mine had actually stated life would be easier,
right,
if he was a girl. So I think it's opting out because he struggled to fit in with other males, and that now that he thinks it's an option, he chose that option.
Well, as all of us who have been teenage girls at one point, we know it's not easy. It's not necessarily green pastures over here either, No. But anyway, thank you so much again. Really appreciate you both coming.
Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you found that conversation as interesting and as enlightening as I did. Very grateful again to Anita and Claire for sharing their stories, for having the courage to share their stories with us, and also to the organization that they belong to, which again is Parents of ROGD Kids. That's RODG stands for Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria. So it's parents of RODGkids.com if you want more information or if you're a parent yourself in this situation. And yes, and thank you also again to our supporters at patreon.com/femsplainers who keep the podcast going. So, well, complete change of topics for next episode. We'll look forward to seeing you then. The Femsplainers is a weekly podcast carried on the Ricochet Network and available pretty much on every podcast platform. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and watch video of our interviews on YouTube. You'll find links to everything, plus how to contact us directly at femsplainers.com. We survive and depend on your support. Like the show? Consider donating as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/femsplainers. And get our exclusive monthly bonus episode, Last Call, in which you get to join the conversation with our guests. And there's much more. And a big shout out of thanks to our audio and video editor, Matt Frum.